Good morning, everybody. If I could have your attention, good morning, everybody. I'm Colin Bryan. I'm chairman of the VLV. Welcome to our autumn conference. Great pleasure to see so many of you here today. And we've got a very good programme, I think, which should keep us very interested as the day goes through. I think the excellent turnout today probably reflects our keynote speaker this morning, Lord Hall, Director General of the BBC. We're delighted that you were able to come to this event this morning. Very, very pleased indeed. I won't do any more by way of introduction of Lord Hall, but I will introduce the chairman for this session, who's Torrin Douglas, who will be very well known to many of you, a former BBC media correspondent, a media commentator, and generally one of the people who have been most active in this area over many years. And we're grateful to Torrin for his role this morning as well. So welcome again, have a good day, and now over to Torrin.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. Good morning, everybody. It is a great pleasure to welcome Tony Hall to give the keynote address at this Voice of the Listener and Viewer conference. He's someone, as they say, who needs no introduction, but I think it's always worth reminding ourselves about what our speakers have actually done. He became Director General exactly 4 years ago this week in November 2012, when the BBC was at a low ebb after the premature departure of George Entwistle. Before that, he'd spent 12 years as Chief Executive of the Royal Opera House, which was also at a low ebb when he arrived, and which he successfully turned around creatively and financially to pretty much widespread acclaim. Before that, he'd spent 28 years at the BBC, starting as a news trainee. He worked on The World at 1, Newsnight, and the 9 o'clock news, culminating as Chief Executive of BBC News under John Birt. And in that role, he launched Radio 5 Live, BBC News 24, BBC News Online, and BBC Parliament. In one of the memorable moments of my career, I found myself interviewing him live in the Today studio about a BBC row, while John Humphreys and Jim Nocte were made to look on in silence across the desk. So weird. They had written a protest letter to the BBC chairman, which had been leaked to The Guardian, and it had been decreed that they were therefore part of the story and couldn't do the interview. So weird. You can imagine how they felt about that. I hope today's event will be a bit more relaxed. We were both on absolute tenterhooks, I have to tell you. It was one of those very weird experiences. Tony's going to speak to us for about 25 minutes, half an hour, about the purposes of the BBC and its new charter, and also what he thinks it can really bring to its the next few years. I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then it's open to you for questions from the floor. And I know that a VLV audience will not be backward in coming forward. So would you please welcome Tony Hall.
Thank you, Torrin. And as they would say of that particular occasion, only from the BBC. But there we are. Good morning. It's very nice to be here with you all this morning. And I want to start by taking you back a few months to May of this year. Britain was a very different place then. The nation was about to experience a shock. I'm not talking about Bake Off going to Channel 4. I'm not even talking about Ed Balls on Strictly. I'm talking, of course, about the upheaval and debate that's followed the public's Brexit vote. But back in May, as you know, the BBC was caught up in an important, difficult debate of our own. And we were right in the thick of negotiations around our charter renewal. And I remember I was appearing at an event where I had to face questions from a whole audience full of people, all with passionate views about the BBC. And before you do these things, you think through the toughest questions you might be asked, you know, about the future of public service broadcasting, and is the licence fee sustainable, audibility, all the things that normally come up at these sort of events. So I was waiting for the first question, and the first question came, and it was, what's going to happen to Helen in The Archers? Now, it's not true to say the whole country was following the storyline about the psychological abuse that Helen Archer suffered at the hands of her husband, Rob, but certainly the whole country was talking about it. On one day alone, I read 2 editorials in the national newspapers, And when it came to the week of Helen's trial, the verdict was front-page news in virtually them all, complete, amazingly complete, with courtroom sketches by a woman when I worked in news I knew very well, from one of the country's leading court artists. The scale of the national debate it opened on domestic abuse was extraordinary. But, most importantly, so was its impact. The Archers team spent 2.5 years painstakingly researching the storyline, working closely with Women's Aid and Refuge. And in the wake of the story, these two charities reported around a 20% increase in calls to their national domestic violence helpline. So there you have it. Great drama, a national debate, and a genuine impact. And for me, it's a really good example of what the BBC can do at its best, and of what we can do when we combine our traditional public service mission with a constant commitment to finding new and better ways of carrying it out. How we plan to do this in the years ahead is what I want to talk about today. And in the next weeks and months, I want to set out our ambitions in detail, as well as the projects that will make those ambitions a reality. But for now, I want to reflect a little on what we've learned from the whole Charter process, and to set out 5 ways in which I believe we need to measure our future impact and gauge our success. As you all know, the start of a new Charter marks a pivotal moment for all of us. It's an opportunity to look back at the journey we've been on over the past few years, as well as forward, most importantly forward to where we are heading. And I believe that the whole of the corporation can take a lot of credit from what we've achieved together over the last 3 years. Throughout the Charter, and with the incredible support of our audiences, we've been able to make a strong case for the BBC. But first, and this is really important, we had to earn the right to be heard. We had to take a long, hard look at our culture. Faith in the corporation was profoundly shaken by the Savile inquiry and a BBC that badly let down the survivors of abuse. Thanks to the very challenging report from Dame Janet Smith, we now have the policies in place and the safeguards in place to make sure, we hope, that will never happen again. And we will continue to take every possible step to make the BBC more open, more challenging, more collaborative, and one of the very best places to work. We also had to take some very tough decisions on our efficiency. In response to failings over executive payoffs, excessive bureaucracy, stifling management, we've delivered what I think, without any hint of complacency, is by any standards a huge programme of reform. We have reduced management layers, brought down overheads to levels which actually are industry leading, just 6% of our total costs on our overheads. And we've taken money away from support areas to direct it towards what really matters, creativity and our programmes. And all throughout this, we've had to keep delivering world-class programmes, content and services. It's what our audiences rely on and is the very, very best case for the BBC. Of course, we have plenty more work to do. Each of these is a journey, it's not a destination. We're not perfect, there's always a lot to do, and we can never be complacent. I can always remember what the great brand guru, the late Wally Olins, said when we were working together at the Royal Opera House. Watching us at the Royal Opera House, he said, "We stood for excellence without arrogance." And I keep saying that to everybody. You don't become a brand guru for nothing, but I couldn't express better what a public institution should try to achieve and what I want the BBC to stand for. But if the last 3 years has been about restoring faith in the BBC and rebuilding its foundations by securing a strong charter, the next 3 years is about renewing it, delivering on a bold and ambitious vision and plans for the future. And thanks to the charter process, we know what our audiences want from the BBC in the years ahead. Nearly 200,000 people responded to the public consultation. The government described it as unprecedented, second only to the consultation on gay marriage. And I want now to say to all of you in the VLV and all of you beyond the VLV, a thank you for your support, your challenging but your critical friendship during that whole process. You made a huge difference to the outcome of the Charter debate. We're very grateful for you for getting the voice of the listener and the viewer out to the people who needed to hear it. And the message we heard was clear. Our traditional public service mission to inform, to educate, to entertain is as pertinent today as it has ever been. But what our audiences actually said was, do what you have always done best, do it more, do it better, and do it in new ways. It's a challenge that, for me, can be summed up in the words of the historian R.H. Tawney. And he said, only those institutions are loved that touch the imagination. The digital age and all the technological tools at our disposal mean the BBC now has the ability to touch the imagination of our audiences like never before, and in doing so, to dramatically expand our mission's reach and impact. Traditionally, our role was simply as a broadcaster, sending out information but getting very little back. Now we can listen to our audiences and get them involved in shaping what we do. We can encourage them to take part, to take action. And what we want to create is a BBC that doesn't just talk to the country, but opens up to it as a partner, enabler, and friend. So we don't just inform, but engage. We don't just educate, but enable. We don't just entertain, but we also inspire. That's the challenge for me under the next Charter. And the first way in which I believe we'll need to measure our success is something very simple. Great public service content for everyone. My earliest experience of the BBC growing up was the Sky at Night and Patrick Moore navigating the heavens and opening up all the mysteries of the cosmos. And I loved it so much, I managed to persuade my parents to get me a telescope for Christmas so I could explore it for myself. But what I loved most was that the BBC was not simply allowing me to explore the skies, it was offering me access to a whole new world of knowledge. And not just me, all of us. Every boy and girl in the country, regardless of who we were, where we came from, or what was our background. And a few years later, along came Kenneth Clarke and Civilization. And just as the Sky at Night offered access to a whole world of scientific knowledge, here was the whole world of the arts. A personal tour guide through the churches, museums, galleries of Europe, a whole history of Western arts, architecture, philosophy since the Dark Ages, crammed into the corner of my living room on Merseyside. Because Kenneth Clarke had a firm belief that art and culture were life-enhancing and that everybody should have access to them. That was the driving spirit, too, behind the third programme, which didn't just give me a lifelong passion for classical music, but helped me on a career path to the Royal Opera House. It highlights something that's always been at the core, right at the core of the corporation, and that's a very simple, very important, very democratic idea. Everybody should have access to good things, to things of